Imagine dying for 4 hours and coming back to tell what you saw. Rachel went through this. After a sudden illness, she was declared clinically dead and had an experience that would change everything in her life. What did she discover on the other side? She saw the sky, but she also found a dark place, the threshold, where souls trapped by regret and lack of evolution wander aimlessly. Are you really living? Can small daily choices decide our destiny after death? Now, imagine that everything you know about heaven and the afterlife may not be what you think. What would you do if you knew there was still time to change your destiny? Rachel had that chance. If she doesn't change her life, she could end up on the threshold. This revelation made her rethink all her decisions. And you, are you living to achieve eternal peace or heading towards a dark destiny? What Rachel saw will make you question what really matters in life. I'm Anthony Bennett, and welcome to my Near-Death Experience channel. Let's listen to the story together. Rachel Collins was an ordinary 38-year-old woman from Minneapolis. She lived a comfortable life with her husband, Jack, and their 2 children, 12-year-old Lucy and 9-year-old Ethan. Rachel worked as a marketing director at a technology company, a career she loved but which also took up a lot of her time and energy. Over the years, his routine became a succession of hectic days, divided between work and family responsibilities. The rush was constant. Although Rachel was always busy, she was devoted to her family. Many nights, she would find herself sitting in bed after everyone else had fallen asleep, reflecting on how life had become an endless to-do list. Am I really living? She asked herself silently. What once felt like a quest for success now left her feeling empty, like something bigger was missing from her life, but she never stopped long enough to figure out what it was. She was a practical person. She didn't tend to think about spirituality or what happened after death. His view of life was simple: we are born, we live, and eventually we die. Growing up in a secular family, heaven and hell were not topics of discussion, and Rachel adopted the same stance in her adult life. Even in conversations with Jack, the topic of death was treated casually, as something distant. However, the rush of everyday life did not prevent small moments of discomfort. Rachel felt there was something more than the exhausting routine. Sometimes, when she watched her children playing in the yard, a strange feeling would come over her, as if something was missing. But whenever she thought about talking to Jack, she convinced herself that she was exaggerating and kept those thoughts to herself. "Mom, you're going to see my dance recital on Friday, right?" Lucy asked one morning while they were having breakfast. "Of course I will, darling. I wouldn't miss it for anything," Rachel replied, trying to hide the tiredness in her voice. Jack, noticing his wife's tension, suggested, "You need to relax a little, Rachel. Maybe take some time for yourself." She just smiled, but knew that wasn't an option. Life didn't stop for rest. It was a Monday like any other, full of meetings, phone calls, and running around. Rachel dropped her children off at school and went straight to the office. As always, her day started off busy, and what she didn't know was that something completely unexpected was about to happen, changing her life forever. During work hours, Rachel began to feel slight discomfort in her chest, something she initially attributed to stress. "I need a break," she thought, but with her busy schedule, she ignored the signs and carried on with her tasks. In the afternoon, in the middle of an important meeting, the chest pain returned, this time stronger. His heart seemed to beat out of rhythm, and a feeling of weakness took over his body. "Rachel, is everything okay?" asked her colleague, David, when he noticed that she was pale and panting. "I think I need a minute," she replied, feeling the world around her spin. Before she could leave the room, her vision went blurry, and she fainted, falling to the floor with a dull impact. The surrounding colleagues panicked, immediately calling for an ambulance. At the hospital, doctors acted quickly, but something wasn't right. Rachel had suffered a sudden serious illness, and her heart had stopped completely. "We lost our pulse," said one of the doctors as resuscitation attempts began. It took 40 minutes of cardiac massage, defibrillator, and medication to try to bring Rachel back. "She's not responding," a nurse murmured, feeling hopeless. For 4 hours, Rachel was considered clinically dead. For his family, those hours were pure despair. Jack arrived at the hospital with his children, not knowing what to expect. "Is she going to be okay, Dad?" Ethan asked, clinging to his father's arm. Jack didn't know what to say, so he just held his son tight and kept his gaze fixed on the emergency room door. During that time, while the doctors fought to save her life, Rachel was no longer aware of what was happening around her. His mind seemed to have been transported to another place. She saw herself floating above her body, watching the doctors work, but she felt an unusual calm. There was a soft light that seemed to call to her, something irresistible and comforting at the same time. "Is this the end?" she asked herself. Suddenly, Rachel was attracted to this light, and her vision of the emergency room disappeared. She felt like she was being taken to a completely different place. What she saw next was something she would never have imagined, something that challenged everything she believed about life and death. As Rachel's body lay still in the emergency room, her mind slowly woke up to a new reality. She felt like she was floating, weightless, and realized she was above the room, watching the frenzy of doctors trying to revive her. She could see Jack and his children on the other side of the door, desperate, but everything seemed so distant, as if that scene was no longer relevant to what was about to happen. "Did I die?" he thought, as he tried to process the sight of his own inert body on the table. Little by little, a soft light began to shine around her, and a feeling of peace came over Rachel. A voice, from somewhere deep in her mind, said calmly, "You're not ready to leave it all behind, but there's something you need to see." Before she could ask what that meant, she was sucked into that light. Suddenly, Rachel found herself in a completely different place. It was a vast field, surrounded by a tranquility impossible to describe. The air seemed charged with pure energy, and everything around emanated a feeling of safety and love. As Rachel walked through this field, she began to see figures in the distance, figures that seemed familiar but at the same time mysterious. It was then that she saw her grandmother, who had passed away years ago. "Grandma," she whispered, not believing what she was seeing. The figure of her grandmother approached, with the same affectionate smile she always had. "Yes, Rachel. I'm here to guide you, but you can't stay," she said softly, holding Rachel's hands. The warmth of that touch was comforting, but something in the grandmother's eyes brought a sense of urgency. "I have so much to ask," Rachel said, but her grandmother shook her head gently. "You're not ready for the answers now," the grandmother replied, looking up at the golden sky above them. "But there's something you need to see before you go back." With those words, the scenario changed abruptly. The field of light and peace disappeared, and Rachel felt a strong tug on her soul. Everything around him began to grow dark, and the feeling of tranquility gave way to a suffocating pressure. She was now in a cold and gloomy place, a kind of foggy desert, with shadows moving in the distance. "Where am I?" Rachel asked, feeling fear begin to rise within her. His grandmother was at his side, but her expression had changed. "This is the umbral," replied the grandmother seriously. "This is where the souls who cannot evolve go, who are stuck in mistakes, hurts and hate. If you continue living your life without change, this is where you may end up. Here, there is no peace, only regret and darkness." Rachel looked around, seeing figures wandering around, looking confused and distressed. "But I'm not a bad person," she whispered, trying to understand what that meant to her. The grandmother looked at her with a firm gaze. "It's not about being good or bad, Rachel. It's about evolution. If you remain stuck in routine, disconnected from your family, and lack of purpose, you will not be truly living. You will just be existing, and that is not enough. Not for the path you need to follow. Those words hit Rachel with immense force. She felt like there was something more in her life, something she had been ignoring for a long time, but she never imagined that her lack of change could have such a profound impact on her soul. The air around the threshold was heavy, and Rachel felt as if her own breath was being constricted. The shadows around seemed to agonize, their shapes distorted and aimless, trapped in that state between emptiness and pain. "I don't want to end up here," Rachel said, her heart sinking. "What do I need to do?" The grandmother looked at her, her eyes kind but serious. "You need to understand that your life has a greater purpose, which goes beyond deadlines, commitments, and work. Love, connection, and compassion are what truly matter. And that is what will take you to true heaven." Rachel was silent, reflecting on her choices. The grandmother continued, "The sky you saw at the beginning, that field of light and peace, is where evolving souls go. There is harmony, understanding, and love flows freely. But only those who can leave behind their earthly ties and living a life of purpose can get you there." Grandmother's words echoed in Rachel's mind. She thought about how she had neglected the simple moments with her children, how she had put work above all else. She knew she needed to change, but she felt trapped in the cycle of responsibilities. "But how do I do that?" Rachel asked, her voice filled with desperation. "My life is full of things I need to do. I have responsibilities." Grandmother smiled softly. "I know, sweetie, but it's about where you put your heart. Your responsibilities aren't the problem. The problem is how consumed you are by them, leaving aside what really matters. Love is the key, Rachel. The love for your family, the love for life, and the love for yourself." Rachel began to understand. Her mind went back to the moments she had ignored, the quick conversations with Jack, the time she said she was too busy to play with her children. Those little moments, which she always considered insignificant, were, in fact, what gave meaning to her existence. "Are you telling me that if I don't change, I'll end up here, in this place?" Rachel asked, looking at the despair that surrounded her on the threshold. "That's up to you," said the grandmother firmly. "The threshold is for those who refuse to evolve, who choose selfishness and blindness over what is truly important." "You still have time, Rachel," Grandma said, her voice softer now. "But you need to start truly living, being present with those you love, finding the balance between what you need to do and what you want to be. It's not about abandoning your life, but about living it with the heart." Rachel felt a wave of emotions wash over her. She knew, in that moment, that she had the power to change, to avoid that dark fate. "I understand. I need to go back," he whispered, his voice breaking. She felt the weight of her choices, but also the hope that there was still time to do things differently. The grandmother approached her, stroking her face tenderly. "Then go, Rachel. You have a second chance. Use it well." With those words, the surrounding scenery began to dissolve. The shadows of the threshold disappeared, and the light of the field of peace that she had seen at the beginning began to shine in the distance. Rachel felt herself being pulled back, her body becoming heavier but her soul lighter. She knew what she had to do when she got back. Nothing would be like before. Rachel opened her eyes slowly, feeling the weight of her body return. She was in the hospital, surrounded by the sound of machines and the worried look of Jack, who was at her side, holding her hand. "Rachel, you're back," he said, his voice cracking with emotion. She blinked a few times, trying to focus. The experience he had had was still fresh in his mind. I saw something," she said, her voice weak but full of conviction. Jack looked at her confused but relieved at the same time. "You were unconscious for hours. The doctors said that you had died, but you came back," he continued, his eyes filling with tears. Rachel squeezed his hand, feeling a new clarity within her. She looked at her children, who were hugging each other near the door. "I saw something that changed everything," he repeated, unable to contain his tears. Jack frowned, but remained silent, waiting for her to explain. "I saw heaven, Jack. But I also saw the threshold, a place where souls that don't change go," Rachel said, her voice thick with emotion. Jack was silent, visibly confused but respecting what Rachel was trying to process. "I need to change. Our life needs to change. I was so caught up in work, in responsibilities, that I lost what really matters," continued Rachel, now more firmly. Jack nodded, still trying to understand, but he felt like something really profound had happened to his wife. Over the next few days, as Rachel recovered, she reflected on the experience and what it meant for the future. She knew she couldn't go back to her old routine. "I need to be more present, Jack," I told him one morning, while they were both having breakfast in the hospital. "I need to value what really matters. You, Lucy, Ethan, our family. I can't keep living like before, running from one place to another without enjoying life." Jack, visibly moved, just smiled and said, "I'm with you." Upon returning home, Rachel began to implement small changes. She started working fewer hours, dedicating more time to Jack and her children. Small moments, like breakfast with her family or trips to the park, started to have more value to her. What once seemed simple and routine was now loaded with meaning. Rachel felt like she was finally living life fully, with purpose. She also began talking about her near-death experience with others, sharing what she had learned. Although some were skeptical, many were moved by her story, and Rachel found comfort in knowing that she was doing something to help others find balance in their own lives. From that moment on, his life would never be the same. After her near-death experience, Rachel returned home with a new perspective on life. The memories of the sky and the threshold were still clear in her mind, and she knew she needed to make profound changes. But the transition wasn't as easy as she imagined. Even though she promised herself that she would pay more attention to her family and live with purpose, the world didn't stop for her. The responsibilities continued. Soon, Rachel found herself stuck in the same routine that suffocated her before. One morning, while driving her children to school, Lucy asked, "Mom, why are you so different lately?" Rachel looked in the rearview mirror and saw the genuine curiosity on her daughter's face. "I saw things that made me think differently, dear. I think I was letting life pass me by without realizing what was important," she replied, her voice calm but full of emotion. Ethan, who was next to his sister, commented, "You almost died, right, Mom? Dad said you saw heaven." Rachel smiled slightly, but her heart sank. How could he explain everything he had seen? However, not everyone around him understood this new phase. At work, Rachel began to put aside some meetings, prioritizing more time at home. His colleagues began to comment, "Rachel, are you okay? It seems like your head is somewhere else lately," said David, one of his closest collaborators, one afternoon. She hesitated before answering. "I'm just trying to reevaluate my priorities. Life is too short to waste it on non-essential things." David looked at her, worried. "I understand, but you have to remember that we have deadlines. The world doesn't stop." That phrase echoed in Rachel's mind, causing a wave of guilt. That night, she opened up to Jack. "It seems like no matter how much I try to change, the world continues to demand the same from me. I know what I saw. I know what I need to do, but I'm being pulled back." Jack listened to her carefully. "You don't have to change everything at once, Rachel. Start small. Remember what your grandmother said, love and connection are what matters. We are here. Take slow steps. His words brought temporary relief, but Rachel still felt like something bigger was about to happen, something she couldn't control. The next day, in the middle of an important meeting, Rachel received an urgent call from Lucy's school. "Rachel, you better come. Lucy fainted during physical education class," said the school secretary. Rachel's heart raced, and without hesitation, she dropped everything and ran to school. Arriving there, he found Lucy being attended to by paramedics, pale and disoriented. "Mom," her daughter's voice was weak, and Rachel felt immense fear when she saw the girl's fragility. At the hospital, after hours of waiting and tests, doctors informed that Lucy had suffered a sudden drop in blood pressure and would need to undergo more tests. Sitting in the waiting room, Rachel felt the weight of fear in her chest. The vision of the threshold came back to him with disturbing clarity. "If I keep neglecting what really matters, I could end up losing the people I love most," she thought, feeling overwhelmed by guilt and uncertainty. In the days following Lucy's incident, Rachel fell into deep thought. Every time he looked at his daughter, he saw the vulnerability of life reflected in her eyes. "I've seen what happens when we take what we have for granted," she murmured to herself at night as she watched Jack sleep next to her. The threshold experience had been a wake-up call, but the scare with Lucy made Rachel realize how fragile and unpredictable life really was. One night, while putting Ethan to bed, he asked, "Mommy, do you think you'll go to heaven when you die?" Rachel was surprised by the question and sat on the edge of his bed. "I hope so, darling. But more than that, I want to live in a way that, when I go, I've done everything that's important here." Ethan looked at her, his innocent eyes shining. "You're going to be with us for a long time, right?" Rachel's heart sank. "I'll do my best for that, my love," he replied, kissing her forehead. At work, the pressures began to increase again. The project she had temporarily abandoned was being reviewed by her superiors, and David was overwhelmed trying to cover for Rachel's absence. "We need to talk about your future here," his boss, Mark, said during a meeting. "Rachel, I know you've been through a difficult experience, but you need to be 100% committed or reconsider your role." The words were harsh, but Rachel knew he was right. The corporate world was waiting for no one, and its time was running out. Back home that night, she sat down with Jack and talked about the pressures of the job. "I don't know if I can do this. I've seen what can happen if I keep losing myself in work. But at the same time, it's part of who I am," Rachel said, her eyes filling with tears. Jack listened to her patiently. "Rachel, I support you in any decision, but remember, you are not alone. Maybe it's time to make a real change. Something that reflects what you've learned." Jack's words resonated with her in a different way this time. The next day, Rachel walked into the office with a sense of resolve. After thinking a lot, she knew what she needed to do. In a meeting with Mark and David, she took a bold step. "I need to leave. I need to step away for a while and find my balance. I can't continue the way I am." Mark was silent, but David, his longtime friend, was shocked. "Rachel, are you sure? This could be the end of your career here." She knew he was right, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was doing the right thing. "Yes, I'm sure," Rachel said, her voice firm. She felt a peace settle inside her, something she hadn't felt since her near-death experience. It wouldn't be easy, but it was necessary. She knew that her life could not be the same again, and this decision was the first step to avoid the threshold, to prevent her soul from being trapped in what didn't matter. The decision to leave her job came as a shock to everyone, including Rachel. Although she was confident in what she needed to do, she felt afraid. What would come next? How would you support your family? "Are you sure about this?" Jack asked, as they talked about the family's financial future. "Yes," she replied, without hesitation, "we'll adjust. I need to really live." With the free time she now had, Rachel began to reconnect with her children and the life that had previously gone unnoticed. She made sure to take Lucy and Ethan to school every day, cooked home-cooked meals, and for the first time in years, was there for every little moment. "You seem happier, Mom," Lucy said over dinner one night. "I am, honey," Rachel replied, smiling. "I'm finally living." She also started investing more time in her mental and spiritual health. Rachel began practicing meditation and even attended a support group for people who have had near-death experiences. "Everyone here has been through something that changed their lives forever," said one of the participants. "The difference is how we choose to live after that." Rachel listened intently and began to share her own journey. More and more, she felt part of something bigger, connected with other people who understood the depth of her transformation. However, difficulties continued to appear. Some nights, she found herself worrying about her financial future, and the external pressures hadn't completely disappeared. "Are you sure you don't want to go back to work?" Jack asked one of those nights. Rachel sighed. "I'll find another way to contribute, but I can't go back to what was. Not after what I saw." One day, while walking through the park with Ethan, he looked at her and asked, "Mommy, do you think I'm going to heaven?" Rachel smiled and replied, "If you live with love, my son, I have no doubt that you will. Heaven is not a distant place. It's something we build here, with the people we love." Ethan hugged his mother, and in that moment, Rachel felt like she was finally understanding the true meaning of her experience. As the days passed, Rachel realized that her new life was just beginning. She still didn't know exactly where she was going, but she was sure she was on the right path. The feeling of peace and purpose grew every day, and she knew that as she continued to live with intention, heaven was closer than she imagined. One night, while reflecting on all the changes in her life, Rachel had a disturbing dream. She was back on the threshold, surrounded by the anguished shadows she had seen during her near-death experience. Voices whispered around her, "You haven't changed enough, you haven't done enough." She woke up with her heart racing, terror taking over. "What if I'm still not on the right path?" he thought. Over the next few days, Rachel became agitated. Doubts began to reappear. She wondered if she had made the right decisions, if she was truly avoiding the Umbral's dark fate. "Maybe I did it all wrong," she muttered to herself, uneasily. Jack noticed the change and one night asked, "What's going on, Rachel? You look scared." She looked at him, struggling to find the words. What if I haven't changed enough? I dreamed of the Umbral again. I'm afraid I'm failing." Jack held her hands firmly. "You're doing what you can, Rachel. Change doesn't happen overnight. The most important thing is that you're aware of it and you're trying, every day, to be better." Jack's words brought some comfort, but fear still haunted his mind. Rachel knew she needed to face this last internal conflict before she could truly find peace. She returned to the support group and shared her anxieties. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm going in the right direction. What if everything I've done so far isn't enough?" One of the participants, an older woman named Ellen, looked at Rachel with a smile. "Transformation is not a destination, Rachel. It's a path. Every step you take, and that's what will take you away from the threshold. Trust in yourself." Those words echoed in Rachel's mind for days. She realized that she was seeking an impossible perfection that would never come. What really mattered was to keep moving forward, no matter how small the step. She was determined to leave behind the fear that paralyzed her. "I may have my doubts, but I won't let fear define my path," she told herself. That night, she lay in bed with Jack and, for the first time since her near-death experience, felt a deep sense of peace. She knew the path ahead of her would still have challenges, but she also knew that if she remained focused on love and connection, she would avoid the grim fate of the threshold. Months have passed since Rachel made the most difficult decisions of her life. She didn't return to her old job, but she found a new passion in helping others who, like her, had near-death experiences. She became a counselor in support groups, helping people face their fears and find a path to peace. Life is fragile, but it is precious. Every day we have is an opportunity to live with purpose, she told those who sought her out. Jack, always by his side, saw how his wife blossomed. "I've never seen you like this before," he said, one quiet morning as they drank coffee on the porch. Rachel looked at him and smiled. "I'm finally living the life I was meant to live, Jack. With you, with our children. All of this has shown me what really matters." Lucy and Ethan also noticed the difference. "You're always so happy now, Mommy," Lucy commented as she helped Rachel prepare dinner. "I am, honey. And I'm glad I can actually be here with you," Rachel replied, feeling lighthearted. She knew that the fear of the threshold was still there, like a memory, but it no longer ruled her life. The near-death experience had changed her in ways she could never have imagined. The sky and the threshold were more than mere spiritual concepts to her now. They were symbols of his choices, of how he lived and loved. And by choosing to live with purpose, Rachel knew she was walking toward the light. At a support group meeting, a newly arrived young woman asked, "Are you afraid of going back to the threshold?" Rachel thought for a moment before responding, "Fear will always be there. But what guides me now is love. As long as I continue to live by that, I know I'm on the right path." The words came out with confidence, and for the first time, she felt like she had made peace with her doubts. Rachel realized that her near-death experience was not just a wake-up call, but a gift. A gift that allowed her to change the course of her life and, more importantly, live consciously and connected with those she loved. Looking to the future, she didn't know what lay ahead, but she knew that with love as her guide, she was where she was supposed to be.